Hello and welcome to Rule of Carnage, a video series and podcast about designing better miniature games. My name's Mike. I design miniature games such as Gaslands and Hobgoblin. And this is Glenn, who designs both miniature games such as Puke Apocalypse, as well as board games and card games like SSO. The title of this show is Designing Better Miniature Games, and there's a reason that we say better, not only because we both are enlightened individuals with growth mindsets, but also because there is no best miniature game and there's no way for your game to ever be perfect. You just got to keep making better games and making your own game better as you're working on it. In this episode, I sort of wanted to just take a moment to retrospect because I'm in the middle of the final stages of Hobgoblin's kind of editing and tweaking and final play testing. The early access rules have been out for a few weeks by the time of at the time of recording, and there'll probably have been just a new version released at the time that this episode gets released, new early access version. And I'm in the final sort of spit and polish stage where the game is basically done and could be released now, like it could be sent to the printers now, but there are still things that could be better about it. There may still be bugs that need fixing. And so I think I'm interested now about kind of two ideas. One is how much you hold yourself to account in terms of a high standard, and also having other people around you, thanks Glenn, holding you to a high standard. And also I think the very, very related idea of when is good enough, and one's good enough for you, and particularly when's good enough for your player community and the sort of game that you're putting out, sort of product that you're putting out in the format that you're putting it out. So there's definitely a few topics to dig into there. Not least the idea of how you're delivering, because I'm in this lovely stage right now where I'm delivering a PDF that can be updated at any point, but it's about to get to the very terrifying stage of physically printed book that has many copies in a shipping container that I can't update dynamically. And that's a very different kind of done.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's one of the things about physical games is that once it goes out there, you can put out FAQs and PDFs, but you're stuck. You're very much stuck. I think so. I think the idea, the perfect like rule book, I would say, is the one that two strangers can pick up, play the game. The way they played it was the way that you thought they were going to play it, and they had no arguments. That is,
and they had the same fun experience that you were striving for in the first place.
There's the thing, whether they enjoy it or not, so long as if they did the things you thought they were going to do, because them enjoying it is a matter of taste. You know, you can say to them, that will happen and that will happen, and it then
I don't completely agree, but I see where you're going.
That's one of the things where it's like, you know, there are really good games, tons of really good games I hate, and you know that are very, very popular that I can't stand. And I'm not going to say that those aren't fun and engaging games, because lots of people love them. And I'm not going to say that they're bad games or bad rule sets, because other people follow them and don't have arguments and do all the things the author, and I did all the things the author intended me to do. I just don't happen to enjoy that thing. I'm not going to say that, you know, I don't like chocolate and orange. I'm not going to say that chocolate orange is a bad flavor. It just isn't for me. And I think for me, the closest thing you can get to a perfect rule set is that it makes the people do the thing you were intending them to do whenever they have a choice or a decision point or interpretation come up. Now, where you say you're going to give them a certain sort of experience, and whether they get that sort of experience, I think is maybe the higher standard level. Whether
I think that's where my minor quibble with your statement is. It's like, I feel like the perfect rule book really, really successfully communicates the excitement of why this game is going to deliver an exciting experience and what the excitement is going to be and how that's cool, and then delivers it in all the ways that you just described, in a way that is, you know, consistent across, you know, people comprehension of the readers and so forth. But I feel like you can have an exceptionally tight game that just doesn't do enough work at selling the dream and the fantasy, and then delivering on it.
Well, I think
anyway, minor quibble. The point.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting thing, because that's partly maybe what we're going to end up talking about here, is that's like the X, for me, that's like kind of sometimes the X factor on top of, like, this thing is functionally perfect. This is an engine that never breaks down. That is a good thing and a thing to be aimed for. Now, can we step it up to the level where it's an engine that never breaks down, that spits out magical rainbows, rather than like entirely acceptable, cheese sandwiches? Well, I wanted a cheese sandwich, to be fair, and this is an acceptable one, but is it giving me, brie and pickle, or whatever it happens to be, on a horribly and collapsing overextended metaphor? So yeah,
I enjoy your doorstop sandwich that's crumbling as even as you try and eat it.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously you try, and I think this is one of the things where I think as an independent designer particularly, you are very individually tied directly to your game. You have to stand next to, sometimes directly in front of it, and you have to identify yourself like more directly with it than maybe a company or a designer that has been contracted by a company. I think that,
Right.
It's interesting because it's like somebody in the Discord, and they didn't mean this, and they sort of came back and said something else, but they did say, somebody does blah blah because of a lack of care. And that's one of the things that really hurts, I think, as an independent designer, because it's like, I really do not think that it's ever down to a lack of like caring. People sweat blood over these things. It's just a lot of these things are really hard, and even harder when you're like a proper independent and you're on your own and you don't have a team of people like holding you to account. The number of people that I talk to who are like, oh, I've been working on this game for literally years, and I keep having, like, I keep throwing it away and getting upset, and it's not good enough and it's not doing what I want it to, and I come back to it and I toil away at it, and I know that those people who can have done some of those things, that somebody somewhere will pick that rule set up at some point and go, oh, they couldn't even be bothered to sort this out. And it's like, it's absolutely never that. It's incredibly rarely that. It's just about sort of being able to get outside of your own head a lot of the time, see things you can't see because you're looking from like your own perspective, because everybody always is. Figuring out when you're fixing and when you're just spinning. I think this is one of the big things. I think it's something we talked about in relation to, like, when we talked about the playtesting conversation, is that when you put your game out to a mass of people want different things. They're going to have different perspectives, and if you keep reacting to every one of those perspectives, you are just going to spiral back and forth on around something that's perfectly good. Every version of it is perfectly good.
And I think that's one of the most pernicious traps, is that like you end up spending time in an area of your game or on a specific aspect of the game that like it's sort of fine, however it's not critical, and it like you can have very strong opinions and design goals for the game overall, and I've often done this, like you can sort of orbit around making endless cyclical changes to some particular area, and frankly it doesn't matter where it lands, like they all function fine, and there's very, very minor taste benefits in one way or the other.
Yeah, I think like repeatedly, like, back when we were working on Gaslands, there were places where it was like, okay, this version is more explodey, or this version is more like tactical. Pick one, there's a reason to choose. This thing is broken, do this thing instead. But then there is it's either this or it's that. And there is no functional difference between them. But absolutely somebody has to step up and just pick one. Just roll the dice, make the arbitrary choice and go, bang, that one is what it's going to be. And what is difficult is that sometimes you offer it to somebody else, and they, sometimes arbitrarily, or sometimes because they've come with like preconceptions or things based on other experiences, prefer the one you didn't pick. And because you had no good reason for picking the one you picked, it's so easy for the doubt goblins to get immediately into you at that point. You go, well, maybe they're right. If they've got an opinion and I didn't have the opinion, maybe their opinion is right. And then you switch over, and then
it's actually really tricky to find the places in your game, or to consciously identify the places in your game where you kind of don't care, because you care so much about so much of the game. And then there will be areas where it's like, I sort of don't mind, like it doesn't, all of these things are fine.
Yeah, and I think a good game design and a good game designer has to have bits where you say, look, this bit really doesn't matter. Either of these is absolutely fine. It is genuinely unimportant, and if people think it's unimportant, maybe I've misled it. It is important. Maybe I've misled them a little bit. And I think that, like, we feel sometimes, because these things are so important to us and we put so much time and effort into them, that every single thing in it we have to care about, and that we're bad naughty game designers if we don't care about every intricate part of the crystal, and every cog of the watch. But sometimes it's like, no, that will just exhaust you. That will just exhaust you and drive you insane, and it really won't make the game better a lot of the time. Sometimes it will just make it more complex and intricate, and sometimes that means it's worse, when you care too much about every single part of it, because then and also you end up overloading your players, because you've lived with this thing for X many years. It's, tattooed in your brain. They get it dumped at them all in one go. And if every part of it has had you go in with like microscopes and make it super intricate because you really cared about this like little subsequence, they're never going to get through the first 5 pages before they have a meltdown on it.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that I find really tricky, is identifying where comments from playtesters indicate that either I need to change, like better express a rule or add some clarification around that rule, versus just find a place later in the rule book to sort of have some commentary or some FAQ and just say, like, hey, so sometimes you might bump into this, and here's something that is an explanation of what I'm trying to get done, but making sure that the first time you read the rule, it's 1 sentence long, it's completely coherent, and if there's some tiny little interaction with some deeper mechanic later in the book, like, I'll address that later, rather than front loading a bunch of player sort of pushing away upfront complexity.
Yeah, examples and explanations I find so hard to get right. I mean, because there will always be a situation where you lay out the rules, and it's happened to be a million times with like everything from Gaslands through to my own games, is that you lay out a rule, somebody reads the rule, and then they become confused because they think they're meant to do what you told them to do. And then they'll come to you and go, did you mean to do X? And you go, yes, I meant for you to do X. But they would like, they were doubtful. And it's always one of those ones where it's like, okay, so then do I need to put an example to say, yeah, that is what I meant, it's okay? And every time you put that example in, there'll be another 100 players who go, oh, another example telling me to do what he just told me to do. This is exhausting. You can do this for every single thing you explain. You explained it perfectly well. And there are people who need reassurance that what they think is what you meant them to think, and they want these sort of comments and examples. And
the classic way of writing rules, which is a perfectly good way of rules, but it leads to very long rule books, is you provide a narrative explanation of what the rule is. In battle, bullets are flying everywhere and troops sometimes get afraid and go to ground. The go to ground rule: when you get 2 blast tokens, you get a -1 to your morale check. Example: these 3 soldiers have just got 2 blast. Like, it's a really good way of explaining. Tell them why there's gonna be a rule. Tell them what the rule is, and then show them the rule in action. But to your point, like, it's a very extended way of writing the rules. But that's how Rick Priestley writes rules, and it's a perfectly good way of doing it.
Yeah, but it's hard. You can't literally do it for everything. And Rick Priestley has a lot of experience of knowing which ones he needs to do it for and which ones he doesn't. And pretty much nobody has that level of experience.
That's right.
And intuiting when you need to do the triple point and when you can just go measure a distance and move the thing that distance, and when you have to like go, oh, walls will require you to pathfind round them. Here's a little picture of someone doing it, is really genuinely hard, and it is really something that is hard-won experience. And it's something you get, feedback on but taking the right feedback in the right way at the right moments is equally really hard. These are really hard. I mean, this is about like holding yourself to a higher standard. This is about doing it because it's hard and doing the things that are really difficult. And because they're really difficult, it's really hard to come up with like solid, clean answers on where the ending points are and how you achieve them and what you need to do.
And I think one of the flip sides of the conversation is that conversation we were just having is that, like, when playtesters are pointing to things, you do need to be really humble about stopping and sort of looking about what they're getting confused about. And like, there is definitely a frustrated, tired Mike who just throws his arms up and goes, "You know what I mean, stop being belligerent." But you just have to walk away and come back the next day and be like, okay, what is going on here that's making the players confused about this? Why does this topic come up a couple of times? Or frankly, why has this never come up before? And that, like, one lone voice has just said, I'm not sure what's going on here. Like, these are places where you have to be humble and you have to sort of try and step outside yourself, which is super hard, and come at it with like just a fresh perspective and say, okay, let me read this rule and try and read backwards to see where I would get to in this, despite the fact I've read every sentence in this game 1,000 times.
Yeah, and it's incredibly difficult, also for someone giving feedback and someone playtesting to explain to you how and why they're confused, because it's confusion. It's a really hard thing to pin down.
It's sometimes confusion. It's sometimes, as you rightly point out, a lack of confidence. Not like that person has self-confidence issues. Like, they are not confident that they have read the rule the way that you intended them to read it.
Yeah,
and it's sort of like there's this spectrum. Like, the thing that I find most frustrating is when I read a rule and it doesn't work. I can't figure out what the hell it's supposed to do. And I get really cross, and quite often I will never play a game again once I've encountered a place where it's like, well, this just doesn't work. You haven't told me how to make this work. Throw the game in the bin. This happens with board games from time to time, and occasionally with war games. And that's well over on the spectrum. And then over on the other spectrum is like, I can see you're trying to tell me something. I just haven't got a Scooby-Doo what you're trying to explain here. It's way too complicated. It's taking me 16 times to read it and I still don't get it. And then there's just in the middle, which is like, well, you told me to do something. I think this is what you told me to do. Maybe you didn't provide enough Rick Priestley explanation of why, like, the setup, so I can't quite match the cinema to the rule. The rule looks interesting and fairly clear, but like, is that the cinema that I'm supposed to be getting? I'm not certain. It's really, and this is where I think at the stage in Hobgoblin I am right now, like, barring the bug fixing, like, I'm very much at the stage where there's a couple of areas of the rules that ended up in a place. They iterated to a place where I tried ideas and I tried ideas and I tried ideas, and other pieces of the game fell away and got simpler. And like, there's a section around outmaneuvering where I was quite pleased with the crispness of the outmaneuvering rules, but also the way that the outmaneuvering rules provided a bunch of design hooks that I was going to later take advantage of. And having done all that design space exploration and elaboration on the game mechanics, I now find I didn't need those design hooks, and I can actually, with fresh eyes, I can go back to Outmaneuvered and say, oh man, there's at least 4 lines of rules text here that just aren't needed because I don't need those hooks anymore. You found another one yesterday with de-incrementing keywords. That was a design hook I put in case I needed it. Now I know that I don't need it, and in both of these cases I can just make the rules simpler.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes, you end up putting a rule set together, and then it's a moving machine, and then you're going in and like pulling bits out and tweaking them and turning them down while the machine's still moving. And then and you do sometimes, when you get to the end of it and it's sort of humming, look at bits and realize there are sort of Frankenstein's patchwork.
Yeah, there's so much gaffer tape, and you could just re-implement it. To do exactly the same thing but be clean.
And sometimes you have to go in and go, look, okay, now I understand what it's meant to do and I understand what it's meant to shape. It's like, okay, let's rip off that thing, let's go back and make it properly, and then actually bolt it back on again, rather than just going, it's running at the moment, it's been really hard to get it running, stop touching it.
Yeah, and there is a real psychological hump to get over there, where it's like, there's a genuine intellectual exhaustion at the end of this process where it's like, okay, I need to dig deep, like end of the marathon, like I still got to come back to these rules with a fresh eye and a smile and a growth mindset. And it's like, God, I just want this document to be finished.
Yeah, and also I think, and then in those last stages, you've got those. There are almost certainly no things left that are actually problems, are actually breaking and falling to pieces. They're the things that confuse other human beings when they make contact with it, and that's another sort of skill you've got to figure out, that's about explaining and welcoming people in. And then there are the things that are the choices that you're just going to go round and round and round on if you keep looking at them, and you've got to say that I've made the choice, I've made the decision, I need to put that aside and remember when someone asks about it that it's a choice, that, rather than anything else. I mean, fundamentally, you care. I know you do care. You are, really, you do hold yourself to a higher standard. I do think it shows through, when you're working on things. I do think that people understand that. And I think it's why the things you put out are well approached by people and are well received. And, people do know, you can see where something is created by somebody who cares, who is putting that effort in, who does hold themselves to a more difficult standard than anybody else does. And you just have to sort of ultimately cleave to that and trust to that. And, that's the best that, the world can offer you in many ways. It's like, it's not going to come out and you're not going to see it and know that it was right. You just have to sort of, look to yourself and go, I know that I cared, and I know that I did everything I could do, and this is ultimately going to be what it's going to be.
And I think I know I did everything that I can do is kind of a sensitive thing, because I think, like, what I want to make clear is that as you said at the beginning, like, it's never going to be perfect. There's always more you could do. Thank goodness for deadlines. And it's kind of why, despite everything, I like working in a publisher environment where I'm not completely self-driven in terms of timelines. There's someone else forcing me to at least finish the thing. Although with Hobgoblin, it was a little slippery. Thanks, Greg. But ultimately, at some point, there's this tension between holding yourself to a high standard and just cutting it and just being like, okay, we got to finish now, because otherwise I'm just going to be here forever.
Well, also, like, holding yourself to a higher standard involves finishing a thing.
That's true.
A thing that is unfinished is of no standard. It's not a thing. It doesn't exist. If you perpetually don't finish it, you haven't held yourself to a higher standard. You've let yourself off from holding yourself to a standard.
You've got to find a moment where you just put your chips in and you just go, right, this is it. It isn't perfect, but it's as good as I have the capacity and time and energy right now.
Yeah, and you're saying that this is the standard I'm holding myself to. I think it's a high standard because here you go. Here's the thing I'm doing, rather than just going, I'm secretly holding myself to a high standard. You're never going to see it. You're never going to see the thing that I get to. It's never going to be finalized. But believe me, I'm right. I'm right up there. And it's like, well, that's a non-standard. It's a non-thing. I'm not holding myself to a higher standard on the cake that I'm currently baking, because I'm not currently baking a cake. And until the thing hits the table, it doesn't exist. And so it's a thing that we tell ourselves is us holding ourselves to a higher standard. It's the thing that we justify not getting punched in the gullet when somebody sees the thing we did and doesn't like it as much as we thought they should, and rips our creative duodenum out through our mouths. But that's what you've got to do in order to be held to any kind of standard and to achieve any kind of standard. And it's not comfortable a lot of the time, but this is the path thou hast chosen.
Yeah. So, well, I think we should rip the Band-Aid off, and we should probably finish this conversation for this week.
Absolutely.
So if you are suffering psychological distress at the idea of finishing something and it maybe not being as perfect as you hoped, please let us know in the comments below. We're here for you. It's okay. It's going to be fine.
Please let Mike know. Go down to the comment section and go.
Yeah, just let me know there's someone else here.
They're there, honey. It's going to be okay.
It's gonna
Post
be
that
alright.
to the comment section, please. While you're down there saying comforting things, please do hit the like and subscribe button. That would be another comforting thing. And, you know, swing over the Discord and hit up Mike and say, you know, we believe in
Well,
you.
come over to the Discord, where there are the welcoming arms of many people suffering the same struggles as you, all trying to finish a game, get something out of their brain onto paper, suffer the indignities of playtesting, and so forth.
Misery does love company. But for now,
That's the subtitle of the Rule of Carnage Discord.
Misery loves company. For now, from us, though, I think this is going to be a thank you and goodbye from this episode of Rule of Carnage. So thank you and goodbye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Yeah, it's going to be fine. It is fine.